Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first panel of 2023. It seems like forever since I last saw you, but it hasn't been that long, I feel like. But at the same time, it's felt like forever. So today we're going to be chatting about YA fantasy sequels. I have some of my most anticipated and some of my favorite sequels here. So I'm very excited to be chatting. First, a little bit about me, I guess, if you are coming for the authors, which you should be. So just a little bit about me. Um, my name's Lily. I'm the moderator. I'm the book reviewer behind Utopia State of Mind on the internet. And before the authors introduce themselves, I just wanted to mention that some of our titles today are from HarperCollins, and I've linked the Linktree and the unionbookshop.org page in the description box below so that you can check out more information about that for our titles and also just in general about that. And so, yeah, if you have any questions as well, feel free to drop them in the chat and I will try to come back to them and or remember them. So please do so and I will do my best. So now I'm going to have the authors introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about their books, and then we'll get into my questions all about sequels and the joy of writing sequels. Kylie, do you want to start?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Kylie Lee Baker. I am the author of The Keeper of Night and The Empress of Time, which is a dark YA fantasy duology. It takes place in Victorian England and Meiji-era Japan. It's about a half British Grim Reaper, half Japanese Shinigami girl who runs away from her home in London and makes a dangerous deal with Japan's goddess of death. That's the pitch for book one. I can't say too much about book two without ruining everything, but you get the idea.
Thanks, Lily. I'm Vanessa Len. I'm the author of Only a Monster, which is about a monster girl whose summer is absolutely ruined when the cute guy at work turns out to be a monster slayer. And the sequel, Never Hero, is coming out in summer, Northern Hemisphere this year, and winter, Southern Hemisphere this year.
Hi, everyone. I'm Serena Nanua. And I'm Sasha Nanua, and we're the authors of Sisters of the Snake. So this is the first book in the Ria and Rani duology, and it follows twin sisters who were separated at birth. One of them is now a princess, and the other one is a street thief, and they meet and decide to swap places on Diwali night. And the sequel is Daughters of the Dawn, and it is now available in stores, and the paperback will be out in June.
Hi, everybody. I'm Leslie Vetter. I'm the author of The Bone Spindle and the upcoming sequel, The Severed Thread, which is coming just next week. The Bone Spindle is a gender-flipped Sleeping Beauty meets Indiana Jones action adventure romantasy. It stars two girl treasure hunters out to break the curse on a sleeping prince with both MF and FF love. And in the second book, we pick up with the now awakened sleeping prince, though everybody is still in deep trouble and still under a plethora of curses that they must break.
Perfect. So I wanted to start off with like the elephant in the room. I know that for second books and specifically also series, it can be a lot to bite off. And so I wanted to know how much you knew about the sequel at the very beginning, like of either drafting or, the concept coming up in your idea. Like when you originally came up with the idea of this book, did you always envision it was going to be a series? Do you want to kick us off, Kylie?
Yeah, so I'm actually really interested in what everyone else has to say to this because what I do really does not work, which is have like an elevator pitch idea. I have sort of a one-sentence idea of what book two will be, because you can't, at least I can't plan too much before book one has sold and or been edited because a lot can change. So you really can't have two books ready to go in most cases. And in my case, I actually didn't think nearly as much about it as I should have. It was just based on the way I ended my first book. My agent said, this could be a duology if you wanted it to. And I was like, okay, sure, it sounds good. And I had no idea what that would really entail. And then it sold as a duology, and then I got paid for a duology. So there was really no going back at that point, full steam ahead. I had to dig myself out of the hole I'd created. So yeah, basically a one sentence idea of what's going to happen. So curious if other people have better ways to do it.
I don't know about better, but not at all better. But when I was writing book one, it was the first book I'd ever written, and I just had no idea how much plot you could fit in a book. So I'd done all this world building, all these character backstories, all this plotting, and then when I actually started writing the book, I realized, oh no, I can't fit hardly any of this story in only one book. So I just felt really relieved when I was able to sell more than one, because there was just so much more story and backstory and world building that I'd done, and I was really happy to be able to get it in. So I actually had a lot to work with, but even so, as I started writing book two, just new things came up, new world building, new ideas. So I would say I did mostly plan it, and I had a lot of threads left over in book one to keep going with, but there were still just new discoveries as I was doing it.
So for us, it was pretty interesting because we started writing Sisters of the Snake as a standalone. So when we were pitching it to different agents, we made sure to say that it would be a standalone. And then when we got offers of representation, all of the agents told us this could be a series. So we were like, okay, great. Now we have to write another book. But we were actually really excited about that because we could expand on the world building. We could do so much more with the characters. So we actually ended up selling it as a duology. Yeah, and because the agents were the ones to kind of get us to expand on these aspects of the story and think beyond a standalone, it was really working with our agent that we realized how much more world building we could add, how much more of the magic we could add on to, and thankfully that really helped us kind of set us up for success with the sequel.
Yeah. I always knew I wanted to write a trilogy. I guess I kind of grew up on like the fantasy trilogies and like quartets and like the 7 and 12 book fantasy series and like that chance to keep adventuring with characters across more than one book. So I always knew that I wanted it to be a trilogy. And then I felt really lucky. I actually only sold in a 2-book deal, but I had a good conversation with my editor about how I like had envisioned a trilogy, and then they let me end it on a cliffhanger, so I knew that they were like actually in for book 3 and that I wasn't going to end up disappointed. And so I think like Vanessa was saying, a lot of things surprised me. You know, like I wouldn't say I knew exactly where all 3 books were going, and like there was a lot of things I learned in the process of that first book and editing that first book, but I kind of always had a vision for where it was all going to explode at the end.
Yeah, so we have a mix of series enders and second syndrome, like second, or whatever you want to call it, sophomore books also as well. But I want to start first by talking about Empress of Time and Daughters of the Dawn, because both of those are like series enders as well. And so I'm curious how it was to draft not only this, like the sequel, but also the final one. And like what kind of emotions went into it, and if everything went the way that you thought it was going to go. So do you want to start, Sasha and Serena?
So for Daughters of the Dawn, we actually had a relatively smooth time writing that book. So we wrote it during NaNoWriMo of 2020, and we ended up writing it pretty much all in that month, and we just finished it in December. So we tend to draft really quickly. And the revision was the hard part, I think. That was the more difficult part with our editor. Yeah, so the revision was definitely the challenge, I would say. And even though it took a little longer than expected, and that's why we had to push the publication date by a few months, but we think it was all for the best, because we ended up with a product that we were really happy with, and we were really just excited. It was also bittersweet to kind of write this finale and say goodbye to the characters, but we had just been looking forward to writing the sequel for so long that actually sitting down and doing it, we were able to kind of put to paper all of these ideas that we'd been coming up with for years.
For me, I think the way that I wrote my series, it worked out well for it to be a duology, because my first book is kind of a negative character arc. So for book 2, I got to sort of, within reason, bend it back in the other direction a little bit. And I really liked how it worked out in the sense that I got to have the two different endings I wanted, with the ending for book one being kind of sad. Trying not to say too much, but because it's a book about figuring out how to be a biracial person, basically, I deliberately didn't want it to have a happy ending. I didn't want it to be like, this is how you do it. Everything's fine now. Here's the answer. I wanted it to feel more real than that, but I also didn't want to leave readers completely hopeless. So book one kind of ends. I have COVID brain. I'm sorry, I can't talk. And book one sort of ends in a place where it's like, wow, everything's horrible and sad. What a world we live in. And then book two starts, and the question is, okay, now what? What do we do with that information? And that's not just a question for my characters, that's a question for me in my own life. So it was really nice to sort of get the chance to both show the importance of what I was talking about in book one, but also have a little bit more hope towards the end of it.
Now, when you were drafting or post release of the second book in both of your, like the series enders for both of you, did you ever think, oh, I want to actually like follow something else, or like, oh, I want to like, has anything ever, I'm just thinking about this right now, this question as I'm speaking right now. Has, did you think of anything afterwards where you're like, oh, actually, I wish that I could now talk more about this, like anything you think that you've like put it all to rest, and then like something, comes out from your dreams, basically. Has that happened to either of you?
I don't want to continue my series if that's what you're asking. It's the way I wrote it. It's very done. I've put that girl through enough, and I feel like it's very obvious with the way I end it that I don't want to continue writing it. I would be interested in writing. I saw someone tagged me in a review where they were like, it would be so cool to have like an epilogue 100 years in the future, and I was like, I could do that. Maybe that would be fun to do. I have no desire to write a book three. Part of it is also not just the story. Part of it is because it's such a very personal book series to me. And so sharing that with the world has been quite challenging in a lot of ways. And I think I'm ready to move on to things that are less, less personal to put up for public consumption.
Yeah, in the case of our series, it was a 2-book deal, so we kind of knew going into writing the sequel that we would have to wrap everything up as neatly as possible. But as we were writing it, as we were writing the first draft, we kind of kept thinking to ourselves, like, we could see how this could be a trilogy, and we could see how we could end the second book on a bit of a cliffhanger. If you've read Daughters of the Dawn, that would be sort of the ending of part 2 of the book. But then we realized as we were writing it that, we don't want to leave it on a cliffhanger, and then what if there's no third book, and then we don't get the chance to wrap it up. So we really had to kind of stuff as many details as possible, which is why it's quite a long story. But and what our editor really had to help us kind of pare back on certain areas of the details, but we still got to get across a lot of the world building that we wanted to. And it's interesting, Lily, that you brought up, was there anything else that we wanted to touch on? There was actually a kingdom that we mention in Sisters of the Snake and Daughters of the Dawn that we don't get to show on the page because we say that it is a wasteland now. But we were thinking to ourselves, what if we could kind of go back and tell the story of how this kingdom came to be the way that it is? And we actually started writing that, and who knows, maybe one day it will be a book. So
I love that. I'm so excited. As soon as you started saying that, I was like, wait, what? I'm into that. I'm also into the epilogue idea, Kylie. Like I would like that for me.
Maybe one day.
I'm a fan now. I'm not necessarily of like going back to things like in full book form, but I think that because of I think like my attention span in general, I've also been drawing more towards things that are a little bit shorter. So like short stories, novellas, like extra kind of like what you're saying, like epilogues. So I just feel like those kinds of things. I hope that 2023 is the year that that kind of explodes for everyone, like this idea of just tiny snippets of things. So now I want to talk about The Severed Thread and Never a Hero, because those are both second books in trilogies, as you both mentioned. And I want to know, how was it to draft this dreaded second book, and also for you both, sophomore books? And then in terms of drafting, can you talk a little bit about the differences in drafting, like middle arcs, I guess, versus finales, and like pacing? All the good stuff about challenges regarding the second books. Leslie, do you want to start?
Yes. So all of that is definitely true. And everything they say about second books, I've decided is definitely true too. I think for like a middle book, like even when you're drafting one book, you like worry about this saggy middle. Like there's this middle part where lots of stuff is going to happen, but you're in such danger of slowing down the pacing and just making a saggy middle. And a little bit of this book made me worry that I was just going to do that. I had so much to set up for in this third book and so many things I wanted to do that I think I had to stop and really think like, but what's the arc of this second book all by itself too? Like there will be some questions I can't answer. There will be some things that you have to wait for the third book, but like, what are the really satisfying things that will happen in the second book for me? And for that, it was exploring the FF enemy still ever sapphic romance. I was like, give that all the space you want to. Like, think of all the things you would have most loved to see in that love story as a teen and get them all on the page. And so there's like, they get handcuffed together so that they can go treasure hunting with like forced proximity, running into walls. Are they fighting? Are they flirting? Like, it was everything I wanted. I think that kind of helps sustain me through the parts that were just like maneuvering as carefully as possible for that third book.
Yeah, for me, I've kind of been thinking of the three books as three seasons of a TV show. So in a way, I kind of knew, because I had pitched it to publishers as a trilogy. So I kind of knew the three stories that I wanted to tell beforehand. So I knew that I knew the overall arc of book two, and there were just a lot of promises that I knew I needed to fulfill about backstories, about plot threads that had started, particularly like some of the subplots. So I knew quite a lot about book two. And the other thing that I really wanted to keep in mind as my kind of guiding light was the original premise of the whole series. And I was really using, my friend Anna came up with this amazing term, which is pre-sighting incident, which of course, like the inciting incident is, I don't know, e.g. like Bilbo gives Frodo the ring. But she was like, there are also things that happened that were inciting before the book. So she was like, e.g. Bilbo steals the ring from Gollum. And I was really thinking, keeping in mind all of the pre-sighting incidents that have led to the circumstances of book one. And I wanted to go kind of a layer deeper in book two and kind of keep those stakes raising while also delving deeper into the characters and really thinking about pre-sighting incidents as I was working on book two.
Do both of you know how book three will end?
I do.
Because I was wondering, when you pitch it, to editors, or you pitch it to your agent, like how much of the whole kind of trilogy arc do you have to be like, this is the, this is what it's going to be, right? Or are they kind of just like, we'll just see when we get there. Like how much, I'm interested in how much you have to like have sort of ironed out before you even like bring it into the Goodreads world.
Yeah, really good question, because I'd of course written the whole of the first book, so they had that. But actually, I think my books 2 and 3 pitches were part of that kind of package, but they're only a couple of paragraphs each. But I actually found those really helpful as I was writing book 2. I kept going back to those original pitch paragraphs, just remembering, I guess, because I think when you write a pitch, you really distill the essence of the book in a way. So I was really trying to keep my mind on making sure I was staying with the original essence, the original promises of the series.
Yeah, I always knew how I wanted the third book to end. As far as like how it goes with editors, it was kind of interesting. The editor who picked up my first book ended up leaving Penguin. So before I went on to the second book, I was going to have a new editor. I was kind of an orphaned author. And so it may or may not have been a good idea, but I wrote a lot of the second book before I even knew who I was going to land with. And I was like, we'll see how this goes. I was totally ready to edit or like do whatever I needed to, but so an editor was like, maybe a trajectory, and I was like, or maybe a book. I show you, and we see if you like it or not, you know. And I got really lucky. We really clicked. And so I think for me, the third book was more of just like a sort of a conversation, like, you know where you're going, and you're gonna hit these threads, and okay, I trust you. You can send me the book when you're ready. And that was with the understanding that I'm very happy to edit, and I really don't mind big structural edits. I was ready to tear it down if necessary, but I really do like that freedom of sort of just being able to pass on a finished product rather than having a very detailed outline.
I wanted to ask about co-writing because I think that is so fascinating. I also think that the amount of books that I'm seeing that are being co-written are increasing. Like I feel like I wasn't reading that many before, but now I see like every couple months like a new announcement for that. So I wanted to ask you how you approach co-writing and for the sequels as well. Like, were there any parts of the process that you felt like you had to tweak or edit or change, like that didn't work as well in the first, or like you could improve upon, I guess?
Mhm. So we've always been co-writing together since we were 9 years old. So we've kind of always clicked in terms of that, and we've written all of our books together. So it's never really been anything too difficult in terms of us passing off ideas to each other or working together. But since this series is a duology and it follows twin sisters, it has 2 points of view, at least in the first book. We knew that we needed to sort of work on both of the perspectives together. And we actually started to work on Google Docs. And so that's how we would sort of balance how each of us would work on each perspective. Mhm. And in the terms of the sequel, there's actually more perspectives. So that was a little bit of a challenge, but we still knew like these two main twin characters would be sort of the heart of the story, just like in the first book. And yeah, I would say we didn't really change our process from the first book to the second book, but we just kind of kept what we had going, and it seems to work.
What So if you had to approach like the whole writing process kind of like brainstorming, drafting, and editing for both of you, what is your favorite one of those three?
I mean, I think we both really like to draft because the book is so new at that point and it's very fresh, and you have so much fun writing it because it feels like there's not really any pressure on you from any outside perspective. And we also do both love to brainstorm together. That's how we come up with our ideas.
Mhm.
But a lot of our ideas, sometimes we just come up with them singularly and we'll just think about them for months and not even tell each other. And then all of a sudden we're like, hey, I have this book idea. And then the other person's like, oh, I wanna try writing that, or hey, I had the same idea. Why didn't you tell me this already?
Yeah. Oh, okay. So we're already getting a question about the perspectives and Daughters of the Dawn. So I'll just switch over to that question as well, because for Daughters of the Dawn and the Severed Thread, there are multiple POV glimpses. I can never tell when even when I'm writing reviews, like if it's what the technical boundaries are, if it's like multiple POV or like omniscient narrator. I never know, so I just always call it multiple POVs. But for both of these books, how do you balance the POVs or the introduction of new POVs and like the pacing? I don't know, like if you think of like, you know, a big arc for the story and then everyone's kind of glimpses, like how do you balance that? Do you want to start, Leslie?
So I have 4 different POVs in the Severed Thread, and that was the most I've ever done. And one of those characters is more of a glimpse than a full. But when I was sort of planning out the chapters, I made a document and I color coded all of the people so that I could kind of look and like at a glance be like, is there a lot of red in this section or like blue? Because I knew that I didn't want to feel like very stuck in a very rigid like one from each, because there would be moments when somebody's perspective was just, you know, more rich for a scene than someone else's with their different personalities. But I also wanted to make sure it didn't feel like someone was hogging the limelight or somebody got totally forgotten in the last third of the book. And so I think there are multiple chapters that I had to try in the book from like 3 different perspectives before deciding which one was right, and just sort of being willing to do that and willing to be a little bit flexible with that, you know, plan for chapters and know that sometimes two people may be back to back because it'll be better for the pacing, and sometimes you may not see somebody for a couple chapters, and being like okay with that really helps me balance that and keep the pacing.
In Sisters of the Snake, it is very rigid, the perspective. So it's just first chapter is Rhea, second chapter is Rani, and then we go back and forth. And then for the sequel, it definitely is more like a glimpse, like Leslie said, as opposed to their own perspectives. But there are two villainous characters who we get to see their side of the story. So we're introduced to one of them in the epilogue of Sisters of the Snake. Yeah. So that person has their own perspective in Daughters of the Dawn, and then we have a whole new perspective. And that perspective is actually told in the past. So what we did was we connected this person's story and kind of created a new storyline for them that would ultimately tie into Rhea and Rani's current events. So it was definitely a bit of a challenge to balance all of those perspectives together, especially knowing where to put in those glimpses and not have it feel too much like an interjection on the main story. So that was kind of one of the bigger challenges of working on the sequel, but we definitely had fun getting to write from these other characters and kind of explore their voices as well.
I'm just like nodding my head over and over again. When I read that POV, my jaw just like dropped. I was not prepared because you're right. Everything had been kind of like 1, 2, 1, 2, and then I read that and I was just like, "What is happening?" It was so good.
We didn't even expect to have these perspectives in the sequel when we were writing the first book, and it was actually our editor who suggested at the end of the first book that we add an epilogue. Because originally there was no epilogue, and she said kind of think of it like a Marvel movie where you see the kind of end credit scene and you see something that will kind of propel the story forward. So we get to look from another character's point of view and kind of see what's the setup for the sequel. So that's what kind of gave us the idea to do these other point of views in the sequel.
I love that idea of like a post-credit Marvel scene. I want like every sequel to have like post-credit Marvel scene teasers for the next one. I want to switch also to Never Hero and the Empress of Time, because I thought one of the interesting and the theme that like I think resonates the most with me about your series as well, both of yours, is that how you explore monstrosity, but also the feeling of feeling like you're a monster, or feeling like whatever that means for yourself, but also society, right? Like, so it doesn't have to be literal, it can be metaphorical as well. And I want to know how it was to develop this theme further in the sequels, to have a little bit more chance to play around with it and explore it. Vanessa, do you want to start?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So my book is about a half monster, half human girl, and it's really told from her point of view. And in the book, she's really forced to make a lot of tough moral decisions, and a lot of them are actually objectively really bad. They're really monstrous. She's doing quite bad things. But because you're right, because you're reading it from her perspective, I think there is you kind of feel some sympathy for her and the other monsters in her team. Just because you understand why they're doing the things they're doing, you understand the stakes for them. But in book 2, I wanted to introduce someone who was a mirror to my main character, Joan, and who was like the overall overarching villain of the series. So I suppose book 2 is now like, well, I suppose if you were like in book 1, maybe I would do that. Maybe I would do those things to save people I love. And book 2 is maybe making you question again, would I actually do these things? Would I do, how far would I go? So I really wanted to hold up another character who is in many ways very similar to Joan, and kind of make those moral questions even more grey, even more difficult, and question even more, is this monstrous? Is that, or is this heroic? So hard to tell sometimes.
I'm very excited for book 2. And Joan did nothing wrong. She's perfect. So for me, it's sort of ties back to what I was saying earlier about how book one for me is very dark, and then book two gets a little bit more hopeful. So in book one, my main character starts as someone who has very little power, and so she embraces the role of being a monster because she feels like it gives her power over the people that hurt her, and it makes her feel like she has a choice. And then, without getting too spoilery, as we get deeper into the arc of book two, she starts to think, did I ever actually want to be a monster, or did I just want to be a person? Did I want to feel like it was my decision? And so we start exploring the somewhat more lighthearted idea compared to book one, that, we're pivoting from this harsh reality of being biracial, meaning you really, in most contexts, don't have a say in what race you are, to book two, where Ren is realizing, well, not having a choice in one aspect of my life doesn't mean I have no choices anywhere in my life, and the other choices that I make still matter. So it was kind of good to see both sides of the coin and have the chance to explore that more in the sequel.
Yeah, because I think monstrosity, and what I think is really interesting is that I feel like I've read a few, or the trend, I think, of like heroines who are playing with this idea of monstrosity, but in a very much like a monstrosity connected to sort of power, connected to like conventional like expectations and conventional, like what society believes is monstrous and like what society believes is powerful. I think that also Daughters of the Dawn and like Sisters of the Snake also has like those themes. I think that actually all of these books have this interesting connection between power and like what it means when other people are powerful, like what that image of power means to them all. I don't know, I'm just going off like nothing. um uh Yeah, that's not a question, I'm sorry. I mean, if you have anything to add, you can add to it if you want, but, like, that's just me thinking out loud right now. Um, so I wanna go on to, the severed thread. I wanna finish my last question about the severed thread and then pop over to some questions that we've gotten from the audience. Also, this is another reminder, if you have any questions, please drop them in the chat. We have a few already, but if you have more, drop them in the chat. So this is a longer question because you mentioned before in the separate thread that it's like a gender bent kind of like fairy tale retelling. And so I know that when you think of fairy tale retellings or reimaginings, there are certain conventions that are that people are expecting references and such like that. But for this sequel, where you don't really have anything like tying you to sort of references and whatever, how was it to write that sequel? And do you also feel like because you didn't have that, you still integrated some aspects of fairy tales or like, fairy tale vibes, whims into this sequel?
Oh, yeah. I love that question. I think vibes is the actually perfect way to talk about like what book two was, because book one was definitely the Sleeping Beauty retelling. There was the Sleeping Prince, there was a kiss at the end, no spoilers there, but and so it was almost like writing a book that kind of had these guardrails on it that like I couldn't get too far off track because I was following, you know, just the idea of Sleeping Beauty, not necessarily beat for beat. And so in the second book, I didn't have that same kind of guardrails to follow. I could do anything I wanted with this story. And that was definitely a little bit daunting, to know that like anything could happen. But I also think it freed me to like dig a little deeper into the characters and dig a little deeper into their worlds and like what makes it unique. And I think what I was mostly able to keep from the fairy tale thing is this idea of like this was the kind of world where a witch cast 100-year sleeping curse, though. And so all the things that happen, all the magic that happens in book two should still feel like it takes place in a world where there is a forest of thorns and a world where like magic has consequences and you might run into people who have curses or connected to ancient secrets. And so I think for me, like that was where I focused my energy on book two. And then there are other little fairy tale Easter eggs throughout like the whole of the second book. Like the huntswoman Shane and the girl in red with her wolf have always been all about the Red Riding Hood vibes. And so I feel in the same way I've been able to sort of like sneak in some of my favorite images from fairy tales.
Yeah, because I was thinking about when I was thinking about this question and your book one versus book two, I was thinking a lot about, for example, like Malice and Misrule and this idea of like, Malice being like the Sleeping Beauty story, basically. And then in a sequel, like what happens, right? Like in what the possibilities that emerge from it. But yeah, I love the fairy tale vibes. I definitely felt like you can have a good sense of the fantastical world, specifically in the sequel. I don't know. I don't, what can I say? I just like magical things that can happen. Like, um, so I want to pivot to a few questions from the audience. Um, the first one we got was for those of you all ending series, which characters will you most miss writing? But also for, I think for people who are continuing series, I would also ask, which character do you enjoy writing the most about? So I don't know who wants to start. Do you want to start, Sasha and Serena?
I'm definitely gonna miss some of the kind of side characters. So Aditi and Shima, I really liked writing about them, and they just kind of came to life on the page, and they were really fun to write about. Amara was one of our favorite characters to write as well, just because she has this sort of antagonistic side to her, but she also has such a deep backstory, and we had so much fun writing more about that in the second book.
I don't know if should I continue calling on people or Leslie, you unmuted yourself, so I feel like
I
you have an
did.
answer.
I did. I mean, it is a trilogy, so I do have one more book that I get to work on with them. But in the second book, I introduced a wolf, and it was much harder to write a nonverbal character than I thought. Because you have to. Well, I looked at a lot of videos of wolves and huskies and stuff to see what they look like when they're happy. But I am so looking forward to more time with this wolf because I kind of fell in love.
A lot of research looking at videos about happy wolves and huskies.
So it's grueling research, really.
Kylie?
I'm pretty sick of my main characters, I'm not gonna lie. I think has more to do with my feelings around being a writer in general and debuting. I guess I introduced a character in book 2 named Susanoo, who's a Japanese god, and he's probably the rudest character I've ever written. He's the only person who cuts my main character down to size because she's a real audacious bitch throughout the book. She so, someone sorry, side tangent. Someone tagged me in some lovely art of my main character the other day that was like, she's perfect, she made no mistakes, and I was like, did she though? Are you sure about that? So this is the only one, this character in book 2 is the only one who's like, no, you've got problems. So maybe him. I think I'm kind of done with everyone else though.
Yeah, for me, I think I didn't realize that I might even miss the characters until I went on submission and I suddenly realized, oh, if this doesn't sell, maybe this is it. Maybe I'll never be with these characters again. And when it sold, I was so happy to be able to spend more time with them. So I did not realize how attached I had been. I guess I had become to them. But I feel like the characters I really enjoy writing are the ones that just say whatever is on their mind. They'll just say an insult. They'll just pipe up with something really digressing just because they were thinking about it at the time. So I really enjoy my main character, Joan's cousin Ruth. She'll just really liven up a scene just by just throwing an insult. You're like, where did that come from, Ruth? But it makes her really fun to write. And I guess in the same way, Joan's grandmother is really fun to write. She's very blunt. So I don't know. I really enjoy a character who is a little bit mean, but with a heart of gold.
Wait, Kylie, I think one of my favorite side characters in your book that we got to see a little bit more in The Empress of Time, and I'm awful with names. Like, I don't remember anyone's names in any of anyone's books ever, but it's like her brother's friend. I don't remember the name of anyone, honestly. But also I can't like
But it's more
describe what
embarrassing
happened.
for me because I wrote the book and I don't know who you're talking about.
I know,
Wait,
but
who's
I
brother's
can't
friend?
like keep telling more about it because then I'd be like, "Oh, but this is what happened, in the second one."
You
But
mean
like,
Nevin? Nevin has a friend or Tsukuyomi has a friend?
yeah,
Who's
Nevin.
brother's friend? There's a lot
No,
of brothers in
Nevin's
this book.
friend.
Nevin. What? I don't know what you're talking. Are you talking about the fox?
Yes, but I don't
Oh,
remember her name.
Tamamo no Me. Yeah, she's fun. Yeah, she's fun.
Yeah, I enjoyed her specifically in this one as well. I mean, I was intrigued in the first one as
She's
well,
fun
but
because
like in
she's
the
like a
second.
kid, so it's like that's kids are more fun to write, I think.
Mhm. But speaking of side characters, because I really like the side characters. You have a little bit of opportunity sometimes for like comic relief, but also like to say stuff that maybe your main characters wouldn't for some reason. I wanted to know for all of you how you balance the introduction of new characters or side characters in your books, especially if you already have a lot of established people already. Like a lot of names. Names are like particularly the thing that I'm the worst at, period. So, the names. Um, Leslie, do you want to start?
Yeah, so I really love characters, side characters, and I did get to introduce a couple more people in the Severed Thread, and I think I really loved that because I feel like in book one I got to explore the friendship between these two main girl treasure hunters, Fee and Shane, but at the same time I got to explore that for a whole book. So it's really nice to have new characters who could like bring up new dynamics and like you meet somebody new and you wonder if you can trust them or not, and like after a whole book of hardship, luckily they trust each other. So I'm glad to bring in characters with new secrets and new backstories we don't know. And so I think I was really able to see each one of the characters as an opportunity, and I really loved the chance to bring in more in the Severed Thread.
Sasha and oh, Vanessa, do you want to start because you unmuted yourself?
I just totally thought, is it going around again? I guess I'm about to say a massive spoiler for book one, so just mute for a second if you don't want to hear it. So at the end of my book, the last twist in my book is that my main character Joan resets the timeline, and it means that at the beginning of book two, only she remembers the events of the previous book, and one other character, Jamie, remembers a little bit. But it really made the ensemble feel very fresh as I was writing it, because they think they're meeting again for the first time, and some of them have switched sides. And I guess these tensions really kind of work in the context of book one. So it felt like I was writing a new ensemble in a way, because they just had different dynamics than they had in the first book. And I guess the underlying relationships that they had were always kind of working in conversation with the new one. So in a way, I felt like I was working with new characters, even though at their core they were the same person. They just had different life experiences in book two.
Yeah, in Sisters of the Snake, there were a lot of characters who were introduced on both Ria's side and Ronnie's side. So they each kind of have their own crew, I guess you could say, going into the second book. And it came to a point where our editor actually suggested that we sort of not mention a couple of characters or sort of cut them from the second book and not have them be so heavily involved in the adventure. And so we had to kind of move some of the characters aside who were in the first book in order to make room for new ones in the second. Mm-hmm. And some of our favorite kind of new characters on each side were the royalty that they were meeting at their respective kingdoms or queendoms in these books. So it was really fun to introduce the royal lineage from each side, and also some of the characters that we were introducing were characters who were from the past. So, for example, the three Blessed Sisters are characters who were the first rulers of the desert kingdom that Ronnie visits. So even though they're not like real characters on the page, we kind of still have to make space for them in the story as well, because their storyline is important to the overall overarching story of the book.
I think this is an interesting question because I think it can be really dangerous to introduce new characters in book 2 if you do it the wrong way, because people get so attached, to their ensembles, the groups if they liked them in book 1. I think about it like I think one way, feel free to disagree with me, but one way that I think this was done really well, is in BBC Sherlock, when they introduced Mary. And I don't think, I mean, I think it worked, you can disagree, but I don't think it would have worked at all if Mary had been anything less than completely awesome. Like if she had introduced conflict in any way, I don't think it would have worked because John and Sherlock have such amazing chemistry. Everyone loves them and how they work together. And then if you introduce conflict into that, everyone's going to resent her existence, which I think is something you risk when you introduce any sort of new character. There's automatically going to be this a little bit of resistance that you need to overcome. It worked out okay for me in my book, I think, because all my characters had capital P problems at the end of the first book. So all of the chemistry was basically ruined anyway. So it was kind of easy to sort of slot in this character for comic relief to sort of break up all the angsty fighting between the characters. And actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I didn't think about this ahead of time before I started talking. The character who I insert for comic relief is based very strongly on BBC Sherlock. So yeah, that's what I did.
Okay, we have another audience question. For those of y'all who were debuts, what boundaries, kindnesses, and joy do you wish you could tell your pre-debut self? Oh, okay. I don't know. I don't know who wants to start off, but that's really cute. Does anyone have an answer that came to mind?
I can say for boundaries that you don't have to read everything you're tagged in just because you're tagged in it. I mean, I think it's pretty common knowledge that you shouldn't read things that you're not tagged in, but people can be real audacious with the things they do tag you in. So you don't have to go through and respond to every single notification because, wow, people are bold these days.
I think I would say to myself that it's a much longer process than you know. And so I think it's probably a really common thing that people suggest, but yeah, just really celebrating each time you do anything that's a milestone, even finishing a draft. I think because you of course have the launch as a milestone. You have, selling the book as a milestone, but there's so much time in between, and it really helps you keep going if you kind of really acknowledge all the work that you're doing along the way just to yourself.
Yeah. What I would say to my pre-debut self is probably you don't have to try and do all the things. I mean, I say this as somebody who definitely tried to do all the things. Like, how many Q&As do I think I could write? Could I write another, blog post or an essay? And like, definitely spun my wheels a lot and maybe burnt myself out a little more than I needed to. And you're probably going to have to do a lot as a debut just to find out what you like, because maybe you like podcasts or maybe you don't. Maybe you like Q&As or maybe you don't. So you probably have to do a lot, but do try to think about what you're actually enjoying. And then, maybe next time just do the things you're actually enjoying and try to concentrate on those.
Yeah, that's definitely something we did as well. For the first book, we did a lot of promotion, and it's kind of to the point where once the book was out or it had been out for about a month, we just sort of took a break from doing so much promotion. And, the fall came and we sort of decided to step back from promotion and focus on writing. So it's okay to put your efforts more toward your writing and not always have to think about promotion all the time. Mm-hmm. And like Vanessa said, I think it's important to celebrate all the little milestones along the way, because a lot of times we're waiting for that moment when the book comes out, and then when it's out, you might feel a bit kind of deflated, like, oh, it's already done. But it took a long time to get there, and you need to celebrate the fact that you did that.
I think that like the advice that you don't have to do everything is such a mood. I feel like because I think with the release, and I've never released a book and never will, so feel free to chime in, all of you. But I feel like from what I can think of in terms of opportunities to review or things to do with authors and like things like that, you get this idea that like you have to do all of these because the only thing that like you can control is that. Do you know what I mean? Like I feel like for me, without getting too like therapeutic right now, I think there's this tendency to think that like, oh, what if I don't do this opportunity? You have no idea, what like breach in the multiverse you'll go down, right? If you don't do that. And I think that it's creates like these like tired little content machines out of all of us. But yeah, I could go on forever about that and burnout.
I will
But
add to that.
oh, sorry.
Oh, yeah, I was gonna say I love that, and I will add to that. I made myself a list at some point of things I was glad I missed out on. Like sometimes I'd be like, I didn't get invited to that conference, but then when the conference was there and I was like really busy and really burnt out and just like in my pajamas all weekend, I was like, you could have been on a plane flight for 6 hours, and then staying in a bad hotel. But look what you're doing right now. It's not always so bad to miss out. So in order to like help myself, I actually made a things I'm glad I missed out on list for myself.
I love that. I'm gonna do that like every day. Things I missed out on that I didn't do that day. So we have a few lightning like fire questions that other people had. I mean, I wrote some too, but I'm interested in these ones more. Um, the first one was best snacks or drinks to eat while reading book two. Oh, while people are reading your book twos. Okay. I thought it was just while people were reading any book twos.
I feel like in our books, there's a lot of Indian food that we mention. And so I would recommend getting some of those street snacks and snacking on those while you read the second book.
Yeah, I was trying to think of the food in my book. There are some pineapple tarts, which is like a, I guess, Southeast Asian treat at the beginning of my book. So I would recommend pineapple tarts.
There's literally no food in my books except for like some raw fish and some sake. And also, as a former librarian, you asked that question, and I was like, don't eat while reading books. You're gonna ruin them. Eat whatever you want.
Right. I guess that question makes me realize that like I was kind of cruel and nonstop to my character to the point where they're like hungry and they're like, maybe that lizard's starting to look good. So like if you like to eat while characters are hungry, you can just like snack on popcorn or chocolate or anything while they got nothing.
Yeah, I feel like in a lot of books, people are really busy. They just don't have time necessarily to always sit down and eat. I feel like that's a
You know,
You do
theme.
have to check in sometimes to make sure, did they go to the toilet in the last 24 hours? Did they take any break?
It's funny because that was exactly why I didn't put food in my book. I was like, we don't have time for this. And then I was reading A Magic Steeped in Poison recently where there's these gorgeous descriptions, like these mouth-watering descriptions of food. And I'm like, I spent this much time and detail writing about blood and gore. And there's just all this wonderful food I could have had instead.
Well, maybe it's connected. The eat the eating and the gore. I'm just
Explain.
saying.
Do you want to
I
expand on that?
I just feel like I'm personally right now reading a book about zombies that spend a lot of time eating other people, and I just feel like that's like eating. It's like a little tasty snack, I guess.
The more you talk, the less I understand. Okay, Lily.
Is this what I was reading right before this panel? They were like someone. Anyway, I'm gonna move on to a different question. My lightning fire question was what was the first title of your book or this sequel, providing that like your sequel is not the title it always was? I don't know. Do you
I can
Leslie?
yeah, grab this one. So for a long time, this book was called The Butterfly Curse. For there's one of the main characters has this curse, the butterfly curse, and it does come back in a big way in this book. And then the editors were like, it kind of is only one tiny facet of this book. Is there anything that kind of encompasses all the characters? And then I cannot take credit for this. Like we brainstormed and brainstormed. And I must have pitched like other ideas, so many other ideas, sand and hourglasses and crows and like anything I come up with. And it was the marketing team that was like, how about the severed thread? And I was like, I love it. I love it.
I think I'm really slow with titles. I didn't come up with a title for book one really until the day before I started querying. It just had a working title of Monsters for the whole of its life. And then the same with book two. I think if I didn't have to title it at all, I would have been happiest. Just would have a picture on the cover. But it needed a cover, so my editor asked me for a title. And I had suggested Never a Hero, kind of with the idea of maybe we'll brainstorm something, but she really loved it. So I was, yeah, that was easy.
I didn't know what to do for my sequel title. I had Queen of Clocks for a while was a working title, but my agent hated it. All I knew is my editor was like, it has to be the blank of blank, kind of like the first title. And then I was like, maybe the Empress of Time. And my then editor was like, I love that. It's perfect. And I was kind of ambivalent. I was like, okay, that's fine. If you love it, that works for me.
For our first book, actually, the original title was Ria and Rani. And then it was the marketing team that wanted to kind of make it more fantasy sounding. So we actually, when we were querying the book, we had a friend who told us, why don't you call it Sisters of the Snake? And at the time we were like, I don't know, we're just calling it Ria and Rani right now. But when it came time to pitch the title to the marketing team, our editor really loved it. And we decided just call it Sisters of the Snake. And then for the sequel, we just wanted to follow the same kind of construction. So that's how we came up with Daughters of the Dawn.
I feel like the Severed Thread I felt like thematically it worked really well. I was reflecting upon this when I was writing my review. I think that it worked thematically really well. But also when I read the Severed Thread, I immediately thought of those Greek like snipper people. You know what I'm talking about? Like
The fates, right? The
Yeah,
fates that hold people's threads of destiny in
Yeah.
their hands. Yeah.
Vanessa, since your books were Only a Monster, Never a Hero, is your third book going to be called Sometimes a Villain? Like,
Oh. I kind of love that. Maybe I'll take that. No, I guess much like my other two books, I don't have a title yet. I really love that, actually. Wait, I'm going to write that down.
I mean, because I was thinking about like it, because when you were all kind of talking about similar, constructions of the blank blank or like daughters, like that, and I feel like you have sometimes and only. Sorry, not sometimes. Well, yes, sometimes. Never and only are kind of like time words, and then you have monster and hero, and I feel like you should have villain.
I like that.
I don't know if it will go because sometimes feels a little wishy-washy, but like
I
that
haven't
would be.
I haven't got enough story for book 3 to be able to title it yet.
Okay, so I think we'll end the last question. I think we'll end on a favorite current read. I like that question. I'm gonna go last because I'm gonna think about a different book than the zombie book. So like circle back to me when I can stop thinking about that one.
Are we just going around? Sorry, everyone went silent. I have to look at the book that I dropped on my floor to remember the title. Song of Silver, Flame Like Night is what I'm reading right now. It's very good.
I just finished City of Nightmares, and it was really enjoyable. It was kind of a really fast-paced read about this world where if you make the mistake of falling asleep without taking these pills and you have a nightmare, you could become that nightmare. So I'm not usually into things that are too scary, but it was like just the right amount of scary for me.
I have my current read right here. The Stolen Heir by Holly Black. I just kind of picked it up and it's really good so far. And I don't know how to not read one book at a time, so I'm just going to pick one. I'm reading The Ivory Key, which is also an Indian fantasy, and I'm really loving it.
Yeah. Since we're on the sequels panel, I read, and I was, looking over there to make sure I got it right, Heart of the Sun Warrior by Suin Tan, which is the sequel to Daughter of the Moon Goddess. And it's like exquisite and gorgeous and all the feels. And so I really loved the way that duology ended. So.
I couldn't think of a book that I'm reading besides the one I'm talking about with the eating people. So I'm just gonna say that it's waking fire. I don't know if they're actually zombies, but I feel like when you eat people, like, what are you not? Like, what else can you be, right? Like, I don't like technically, like mythological or like lore speaking. I don't know if they're legit zombies, but like when people are eating people, that's what I'm gonna assume. Um, I'm reading other books, but like honestly, the zombie thing is really what's like keeping me up at night. Um, anyway, thank you all for joining us in this panel. The links for everyone's books are in the description box below. I think that this is such a great mix of like books you can buy right now and also books you can pre-order. Even if you can only pre-order it for a week, it still counts. So definitely do it. And yeah, thank you all for joining. Thank you so much to the authors for chatting about your series ender / second books / sophomore books / books in general. And I hope everyone has a really great rest of your waking hours, however long you have in your current time zone, whatever that means to you today. But yeah, I hope everyone has a great day, and we will see you in the next. There will be another sequels panel with the Ivory Key. So, well, not the Ivory Key. I can't remember the name of anything actually, but the sequel to that. So yeah, this is the first of many panels. My inbox can witness that many panels. But yeah, I had a really great time, and it's really fun to like start off the first one with book twos.
And thank you, Lily, for organizing all of this and for all